And I set out to break their spirit and pummel them. I want them to understand what it's like. I want them to understand that the secret, the great secret of writing, I'm about to give you the great secret. Here it is, he said, looking directly into the lens. The great secret is this. Anybody can become a writer. Anybody. I mean, if you look at the crap that Jacqueline Suzanne and Judith Krantz and Sidney Sheldon write, you know that anybody can become a writer. Something that lives in a petri dish can become a writer. The trick is not becoming a writer. The trick is staying a writer. Day after hour, after year, after story, after novel, and staying at it and perfecting your craft and becoming the kind of storyteller whose work matters after a long measure of time. Not judged on one story, not one flash-in-the-pan novel, but as Irwin Shaw said, a mountain range that rises to peaks and falls to valleys and goes on and has some shape to it. That's what it's all about.
I understand that something Harlan Ellison said to you at Clarion ended up inspiring your story, Wong's Lost and Found Emporium.
Yeah, he assigned us to write a story about where lost things go. And I wrote a story at the time that wasn't very good. A number of people wrote stories about lost things that weren't very good. One of them had a wonderful scene. A guy named Steve Brown had a jet fighter pilot flying across the Bermuda Triangle. His jet disappears. The pilot's still going 800 miles an hour forward at 30,000 feet, but he doesn't have a jet anymore. But overall, P.C. Hodgel was the only one that wrote a good story. And Harlan rightfully scolded all of us for doing a lousy job. And in so doing, demonstrated the point that we had missed. And he started giving us examples of what we should have done. And one of them was that a woman who has felt sexually exploited for all her adult life runs into a chance to start her adult life over again and relive it in a different way. Or a man walks into a garage with a pedestal and has a white telephone on it, and he has a chance to pick it up and call his dead father and say all the things he'd wanted to say to him while he was alive and never did. And Harlan gave us a bunch of these examples off the top of his head, left everybody in silence, a number of people in tears. Harlan left, and it was probably the most inspiring experience that we had at my Clarion in '74. A lot of other people gave us more in terms of nuts and bolts, how to, explain a character, how to, develop a plot, and so on. But this experience reminded me that there was a great deal you could use with the whole idea of real personal loss, not something trivial like car keys, but losing something important. It took me 7 years to put it together into a story that I could actually finish. And 7 years later, I wrote the first draft of Wong's Lost and Found Emporium. It went through one major revision after that, and went on to become the story I'm best known for at this point.
7 years and then a revision. Wow. Wong's Lost and Found Emporium, about a magical curio shop full of lost opportunities, misplaced priorities, and missing emotions, was nominated for the Hugo Award, the Nebula Award, the World Fantasy Award, and was adapted for an episode of The Twilight Zone. All this from a writer whose original story was trashed by Harlan, just as Harlan's work was trashed by his writing professor over 40 years ago. So thank you, Nancy, for trashing my story. What I find most intriguing is that when Harlan scolded the writers, I'm sure most of them were just crushed, but William Wu found it to be the most inspiring moment of his whole Clarion experience. If a pummeling by Harlan doesn't scare you off, maybe you are cut out to be a writer. When a student looks back on their Clarion experience, what should they be able to say that it gave them that they couldn't have picked up on their own?
If nothing else, it put you in touch with an audience, and you started then getting a sense of audience, and I think that's very important. I don't think you can write without an audience, or an audience in mind, or a sense of need, something calling stories out of you. Because I think that writing is an immense act of generosity. It feels like you're doing something for other people. It looks to other people like you're an ambitious little nerd locking yourself away with dreams of grandeur. It doesn't feel like that. It feels like you're putting a lot of time and effort in for other people. And I think if you're making a gift to somebody, you do need to know the kind of gift they want.
What advice do you have to carry your students past graduation? Because it must be tough to leave the intensely creative atmosphere of Clarion and head back to the solitude of the typewriter.
Well, there's the Clarion, I don't know what they call it. What's it called? The Clarion letdown or the Clarion slump. That's it, the Clarion slump. Where supposedly if you go to Clarion, then you never write again for at least a year, and possibly some people never write again after that. I tell them usually to forget about it, for, you know, take a break. It will take time for these things to gel and stew. And then I tell them that I feel that Clarion is in many ways a fantasy. It is a false situation. They have gotten 6 weeks, even though they're tired, even though they've had to work really hard. They've gotten 6 weeks where they did not have to take the dog to the vet, did not have to babysit children, did not have to go to work, did not have to live in the real world. And since I started, my writing started when I was, I sent out my first professional story a month after my baby was born. And I had decided to stay home. I was a teacher. I was going to stay home, raise my daughter, and then I was going to write professionally, because that was something I could do at home. I never had, for the next 18 years, more than 15 minutes at my disposal. And I learned that if I really wanted to be a writer, I could not wait to have more than 15 minutes at my disposal. And I learned to write in the orthodontist's office while waiting for my daughter, at football games, at basketball games, in the car outside the school, at my husband's gymnastics practice, in odds and ends. And I learned to write in those little spaces, and I learned to take advantage of the time I had. And if my daughter would happen to be gone for the afternoon, I would race like crazy to the typewriter and take advantage of those times. And so I try to teach them what skills I learned for working in pieces, for working when you have the time, for not fantasizing. You know, people do that all the time. Well, I plan to write this summer. Well, I plan to write as soon as school starts. Well, I plan to write over spring break. And it never quite comes true. You've got to write today when you have the time that you have.
She's right. And I have all the time in the world. Well, I know, those who can't do, teach. Nancy, take dictation. How to Write Science Fiction by Commander Rick. Step 1, have lots of conflict and interesting characters and a plot with a big climax and sex with a big climax and dialogue and an exotic setting and some narrative prose and a catchy title and a punchy first line, and avoid run-on sentences and do the writing. When you hit writer's block, don't just go off and watch TV. Overcome your writer's block by really...
In the elevator, my breast punched a man who was smoking a cigar. He coughed, choked, and called me unladylike. A woman told me I had done the right thing. When I got home, I took off my clothes and looked at myself in the mirror. What beautiful breasts, pendulous, centerfold quality, heavy as water balloons, firm as paperweights. I would be sorry to say goodbye to them. I sighed and they bobbled. Well, guys, no more exercise for you, I said. I would have to let them go. I couldn't let my breasts become a menace to mankind. I would rather be noble and suffer a bunch.
So it seems that our investigations have proven that the symbol on this can of tuna means that no dolphins were killed to produce either the paper label or the tin can. I'm Enrico Gruen, and this has been Second Nature. Next week on Second Nature, the stresses of life in space. Because astronauts are cut off from the real world, in cramped quarters, eating artificial food, with no sex, while doing non-stop work, NASA has decided to send only college students.